Have you ever imagined a moment when an entire nation wakes up to discover that its king is ready to walk away from the throne? Not after years of public debate, not after a political crisis, but because of a deeply personal decision hidden behind palace walls. A single announcement from Princess Anne sent shockwaves across Britain, suggesting that King Charles had reached a point from which there was no return. But as dramatic as the announcement sounded, it was only the beginning of a story that would reveal the painful choices, private conversations, and family sacrifices behind the crown. Today, we're taking a closer look at the emotional chain of events surrounding the reported abdication plans, the growing pressure on King Charles, and the unexpected role Princess Anne played in delivering one of the most difficult messages in modern royal history. More importantly, we'll explore how this decision affected not only the monarchy, but also the relationship between a father preparing to step aside and a son suddenly forced to become king far sooner than expected. Let's begin. Britain has witnessed countless royal announcements over the centuries, but few could compare with the atmosphere surrounding Princess Anne's appearance before the public. She had arrived expecting to carry out what was meant to be another routine royal engagement. Instead, everything changed the moment she stepped behind the lectern holding a cream-colored statement. Before speaking, Anne glanced toward the empty chair that had been reserved for King Charles. The silence itself seemed to carry a message. Then she delivered words that stunned everyone listening. According to the statement, His Majesty had reached a decision that no monarch ever wishes to make. The formal process of abdication had already begun. King Charles believed he could no longer carry out his responsibilities as sovereign effectively, and preparations were underway for Prince William to become the next king. The announcement was direct. There was no attempt to soften its meaning. Yet observers quickly noticed something unusual. Princess Anne appeared visibly emotional. Her brief hesitation suggested there was much more behind the decision than the public had been told. As television networks interrupted normal programming and headlines spread across Britain within minutes, one question echoed everywhere. Why now? Behind the public announcement stood three members of the royal family, each carrying an enormous personal burden. For King Charles, this was never simply about giving up a constitutional position. After waiting decades to inherit the throne, becoming king had defined much of his life's purpose. Now, the document resting on his desk represented the possibility of surrendering everything he had spent a lifetime preparing for. Witnesses described him sitting quietly with the draft before him. The signature line remained blank. He removed his glasses, pressed his fingers against his eyes, and stared silently at the page. Signing it would not simply end a reign. It would close the chapter he had spent his entire adult life waiting to begin. Prince William experienced the news very differently. Although he had prepared for kingship since childhood, he had always imagined the transition happening naturally over many years. Instead, the future he believed was still distant had suddenly arrived without warning. Princess Catherine reportedly noticed the subtle signs of anxiety immediately. William repeatedly adjusted his sleeves before meeting his father. It was a familiar habit she recognized whenever he tried to hide fear. She understood that becoming king would transform every aspect of their family's life. Not only their titles, but also the childhood of their children, their privacy, their freedom. Even ordinary family moments would disappear forever. Princess Anne carried perhaps the most difficult responsibility of all. As the king's sister, she loved Charles deeply. As Princess Royal, she also understood that duty sometimes demanded painful honesty. Charles trusted her because she had built her reputation on speaking plainly, even when the truth was uncomfortable. Still, every sentence she delivered publicly felt like a wound inflicted upon two people she cared about most. The situation became even more complicated inside the palace. Queen Camilla reportedly learned through internal briefings that Princess Anne, not she, had been chosen to announce the king's decision. Her first reaction was not public anger. It was confusion. She wanted to know when the decision had actually been made. The answer surprised everyone. King Charles had reportedly begun drafting abdication documents weeks earlier. This had not been an emotional reaction made overnight. It had been developing quietly behind closed doors. William himself reportedly discovered a handwritten date on the earliest draft. That single date pointed back to an event few people realized had become a turning point, a royal ceremony intended to project confidence. Instead, it exposed vulnerability. Weeks before the public announcement, King Charles insisted on attending an important Commonwealth service despite concerns about his health and stamina. Senior members of the family had already discussed reducing his schedule. They worried that increasingly demanding appearances might become difficult. Charles interpreted those concerns differently. He feared that those closest to him were already preparing to replace him. After the ceremony ended, something happened away from cameras. Inside a quiet antechamber, Charles reportedly became confused. He asked why the ceremony had not yet begun. Princess Anne froze. The event had already finished. Gently taking her brother by the arm, she explained where they actually were. Charles reportedly whispered a heartbreaking sentence. "Then I should not have been out there. It wasn't anger. It wasn't embarrassment. It was fear." When Prince William entered moments later, he found his father trying to steady himself. Instinctively, he moved forward to help, but Charles stopped him. "Don't touch me." Those 3 words hurt William more deeply than any public criticism ever could. Later, medical advisors reportedly warned that continued strain could produce further unpredictable episodes during official duties. They did not order Charles to step down, but they made it clear that the risks were increasing. That evening, Charles reportedly dictated the opening lines of an abdication statement. The handwritten date William later discovered matched that very day. When William eventually learned what had happened, grief turned into frustration. Not because his father had struggled, but because he had struggled alone. Soon afterward, father and son met privately. No cameras, no advisors, no carefully prepared speeches. Only 2 men facing one another across a table with abdication papers lying between them. William spoke first. "You decided the future of my family without speaking to me." Charles defended his secrecy. He believed he had protected William, Catherine, and their children from losing the final weeks of ordinary family life before the crown transformed everything. William saw things differently. He wasn't angry about becoming king. He was hurt that his father hadn't trusted him enough to share the burden. The conversation quickly became emotional. Charles accused William of treating abdication as merely a constitutional process. William answered that he wasn't looking at constitutional law. He was looking at his father, a frightened father carrying everything alone. For a moment, emotions overwhelmed both men. Charles stood abruptly before sinking back into his chair, exhausted. William admitted he had always imagined standing beside his father during a future accession, not replacing him because of sorrow. Then Charles revealed another possibility he had quietly considered: a regency. Instead of abdicating completely, another royal could temporarily perform many official duties while the monarch technically remained king. However, legal advisors warned that such an arrangement could leave William carrying enormous responsibility without full authority. Charles refused to put his son in that impossible position. If William had to bear the burden, he believed William deserved the authority as well. As those deeply personal conversations unfolded, palace officials faced a different challenge. A royal transition isn't simply announced. Every aspect of government must be coordinated: security, official titles, public appearances, government documents, international communication. Everything changes together. Even one mistake could make the monarchy appear divided. During one key council meeting, Princess Anne sat quietly with a second sealed document beside her. This document contained Charles's personal wishes. When she finally opened it, everyone in the room fell silent. The king requested that there be no lengthy farewell tour, no extended public goodbye. He feared another moment of public confusion would overshadow his final days as monarch. Rather than preserving dignity, it could become humiliation. Perhaps the most surprising instruction involved Princess Anne herself. Charles gave her, not William, not Camilla, and not senior advisors, the authority to halt the process if she believed he no longer truly wished to abdicate before signing the final papers. It was an extraordinary responsibility. She had been asked to judge whether her own brother still meant the decision that would end his reign. As preparations accelerated, the palace atmosphere changed dramatically. Staff lowered their voices. Official schedules were rewritten. William's name began appearing on confidential briefing papers he had never expected to receive so soon. One small moment captured Charles's pain more clearly than any speech. A familiar red dispatch box carrying government documents was taken past his room. It was being prepared for William's emergency briefings. Charles asked quietly where it was going. When he received the answer, he simply returned to his room and closed the door. No argument, no complaint, only silence. Camilla encouraged him to reconsider. She insisted there was still time to stop everything. Charles reportedly answered with heartbreaking honesty. Remaining on the throne simply because he feared becoming irrelevant would ultimately betray the institution he had sworn to serve. Realizing the emotional wounds between father and son remained unresolved, Princess Anne arranged one final private meeting. No officials, no advisors, no family members waiting outside. Just Charles and William. Charles carried the completed document. William carried years of expectation. This time they did not speak as king and heir. They spoke as father and son. Charles handed William a sealed letter. He asked him not to open it until after the accession. Then, for the first time, Charles openly admitted what pride had hidden. He envied the confidence with which William protected Catherine and their children. Throughout his own life, Charles believed duty required constant sacrifice. Looking back, he feared he had often allowed responsibility to outweigh affection. Now he worried he had repeated that mistake by hiding his struggles. William listened quietly. Then he knelt beside his father's chair. Not as a subject before a monarch, but as a son refusing to let shame define his father's legacy. He made one promise. He would accept the crown only if Charles stopped calling the decision a defeat. Charles slowly realized something profound. Abdication was not surrender. It was service. One final act, placing the future of the monarchy ahead of personal pride. He signed the document, then reached out his hand. William took it. This time, silence carried forgiveness rather than pain. Outside the palace, Britain reacted with mixed emotions. Breaking news banners appeared everywhere. Church bells rang. Crowds gathered outside Buckingham Palace. Some mourned a reign they believed had barely begun. Others viewed William's arrival as the beginning of a new era. One simple gesture captured the nation's mood. An elderly man placed a handwritten card outside the palace gates. It read, "Thank you, Charles. Stand strong, William." Nearby, a young girl placed 2 flowers, one for each king, and innocently asked her mother whether the older king would still be part of the family. That simple question resonated across Britain. People realized they weren't only witnessing a constitutional transition. They were watching a father step aside for his son. Major newspapers described the moment not as defeat, but as sacrifice. Even those divided over the future of the monarchy recognized the deeply human emotions behind the decision. The final ceremony was remarkably restrained. King Charles signed the completed instrument before assembled witnesses. Then, instead of keeping it himself, he handed it directly to Princess Anne. No lengthy speech followed. The gesture itself said everything. William approached. Protocol might have expected a formal bow. Instead, he embraced his father. For one brief moment, titles disappeared. There was no king, no heir. Only a father and son sharing the weight of an extraordinary decision. Later, William opened the private letter Charles had written. It contained no constitutional advice, no instructions for ruling, only an apology, an expression of pride, and one final piece of wisdom. Do not become the crown so completely that you forget the man beneath it. Those words became more than personal advice. They became a reminder that even the monarchy ultimately depends on the humanity of those who wear the crown. This remarkable story reminds us that behind every royal title are real people facing impossible choices. Whether viewed as duty, sacrifice, or an act of personal courage, the reported decision reshaped not only the future of the monarchy, but also the bond between a father and his son. What do you think? If you had been in King Charles' position, would stepping aside have been the right decision, or should he have remained on the throne despite the challenges? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss our latest royal updates. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.